The mop water was murky, swirling with the dirt of the rich. Jason Reed had spent the last 4 hours scrubbing the marble floors of Westwood Grand Hotel, the kind of place where billionaires casually sipped $1,000 champagne, and people like him were invisible. His muscles ached, his uniform smelled of bleach, and his paycheck barely covered rent. But this was life, a life that wasn't going anywhere. At 27, Jason was stuck. No family, no savings, no future. His mother had died when he was 18, and whatever dreams he had of college or a better life had disappeared with her. Now he existed, nothing more. But that night, as he wheeled his cart into the private lounge, his life changed forever. She was sitting alone at a corner table. Vivian Blackwood, 70 years old, the sole heiress to a family fortune that stretched back generations. A woman so powerful that people whispered her name like a legend. Jason had seen her before, but always from a distance, always untouchable. Tonight, she was watching him. Her eyes, steel gray, sharp, calculating, followed his every movement. He could feel the weight of her stare as he wiped down a nearby table, his hands tightening around the cloth. Then she spoke. "You're Jason Reed, aren't you?" His heart stumbled. People like her didn't acknowledge people like him. He hesitated. "Yes, ma'am." Her lips curled into a small smile. "Sit." Jason blinked. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I wasn't asking." Something about her tone made his skin prickle. Commanding, unshakable, like she already knew he'd obey. Against all reason, he sat. She studied him, fingers tapping lightly against her wineglass. "You're a hard worker," she mused. "No family, no attachments. No one would miss you if you disappeared." Jason's pulse quickened. "Excuse me?" Vivian smirked, amused by his reaction. "Relax, I meant it as a compliment." She leaned forward. "Tell me something, Jason. If I offered you a life beyond your wildest dreams, would you take it?" His throat went dry. What kind of life?" She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small velvet box. She placed it between them, flicked it open, revealing a gold wedding band. Jason's stomach flipped. She smiled. "Marry me." His mind fractured. He almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about the way she was looking at him. Dead serious. "I don't," he started, but she lifted a hand. "Hear me out," she said smoothly. 1 year. You'll live in my estate, have everything you've ever wanted, and when it's over, you'll walk away with enough money to never work again." Jason felt the walls closing in. This was insane. Insane. His voice was hoarse. "And what do you get out of it?" Vivian's expression darkened just slightly, a flicker of something unreadable passing through her eyes. "Control," she murmured, "over my own life." Jason's stomach twisted. Something about this felt wrong. And yet, he had nothing. Nothing. His fingers brushed against the velvet box, his pulse hammering in his ears. Vivian tilted her head, her voice smooth as silk. "Say yes, Jason. What do you have to lose?" Jason couldn't sleep that night. Vivian's voice echoed in his mind. The velvet box, the gold ring, the way she had spoken, as if this wasn't a proposal but a contract. By morning, he had convinced himself it was a joke, a test. Rich people played games like that, right? But when he arrived for his shift, a black car was waiting for him. The driver, expressionless, dressed in a crisp black suit, held out an envelope. Inside was a single card. 7 p.m., Blackwood Estate. Don't be late. Jason's throat tightened. This was real. The car ride was silent, the city lights fading into long, dark roads lined with twisted trees that felt like shadows reaching for him. Then, the Blackwood Estate. It was a fortress of wealth, stretching across acres of manicured land, towering windows reflecting the moonlight. Jason had never seen anything like it. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a monument to something long forgotten. The moment he stepped inside, it felt colder. Vivian was waiting in the grand hall, dressed in black silk, her silver hair swept back, her steel gray eyes watching him with quiet amusement. "You showed up," she said. Jason forced himself to stand tall. "I need answers." Vivian smirked. "No, Jason, you need money." His jaw tightened, but she continued. "Sit." A long dining table stretched before them, covered in documents, legal papers, a marriage license with his name already written. Jason's stomach twisted. "You came from nothing," Vivian murmured. "You could die tomorrow and no one would care. But if you sign this, you will be someone. You will have power, and when it's over, you'll walk away a rich man." His fingers hovered over the pen. Everything about this was wrong, but he could see it, the way out, the freedom. His voice was hoarse. "And all I have to do is be your husband?" Vivian's lips curled into something almost dangerous. "For 1 year." Jason's hand shook as he grabbed the pen. Vivian leaned in, her voice a whisper. "Sign, Jason, and your old life disappears." His pulse thundered. The ink bled across the paper. And just like that, Jason Reed was no longer just a janitor. He was Jason Blackwood. Vivian smiled, but behind her eyes something darker lurked. Jason had just sold himself to a woman who never did anything without a reason, and he had no idea what he had just walked into. The wedding was over before Jason could fully process what had happened. No guests, no vows filled with love, just cold signatures on a legal document, a quick exchange of rings, and a single glass of champagne that tasted like a deal with the devil. Vivian never asked him to kiss her. She barely even looked at him after they were declared husband and wife. Instead, she simply turned to her assistant, gave a curt nod, and walked away. As if she had just acquired a business asset, not a husband. Jason sat in the back of a luxury car as it carried them to her estate, the place where he now lived. Everything about the situation felt off. He had expected some level of pretense, some display of affection for the press, but there was nothing. No photographers, no journalists. It was as if the world wasn't even supposed to know they were married, and that scared him more than anything. By the time they arrived, a storm had rolled in, dark clouds hanging heavy over the sprawling mansion. The place was eerily quiet, not lifeless, but watchful. The staff greeted them with deep bows, not a single one making eye contact with Jason. Vivian turned to him with a small, knowing smile. "Welcome home, darling." Her voice was polished, smooth, but there was something else beneath it, something rehearsed. Jason's fingers twitched at his side. The moment the doors closed behind them, Vivian's demeanor shifted. Gone was the elegant, untouchable billionaire. In her place was a woman with calculating eyes, a woman who had planned every second of this. She walked ahead of him, her heels clicking against the marble floors, leading him up a grand staircase that felt like it belonged in a museum. Finally, she stopped in front of a large door at the end of the hallway. "This is your room," she said simply. Jason blinked. "Wait, we're not—" Vivian smirked. "Sleeping in the same bed?" Jason swallowed hard. "I figured, for appearances—" She let out a soft laugh, but it was devoid of warmth. "Jason, I didn't marry you for appearances." His stomach tightened. "Then why did you—" For the first time, something flickered across her expression. A hesitation, a shadow of something that almost looked like regret. Then it was gone. "You'll know soon enough." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the mansion, leaving Jason standing there, a husband without a wife, trapped in a house that felt like it was keeping secrets. He didn't know what scared him more, that he didn't understand what he had just become a part of, or that, deep down, some part of him already knew. Jason didn't sleep that night. The storm outside raged against the windows, but inside the mansion, it was eerily silent. Too silent. The bed was massive, covered in silk sheets that probably cost more than his yearly salary as a janitor. But it felt cold, unused, like no one had ever slept in it before. Vivian's words played over and over in his mind. "You'll know soon enough." What did that mean? Why had she really chosen him? At 3 a.m., he couldn't take it anymore. He needed answers. Jason pushed the heavy door open, stepping cautiously into the long, dimly lit hallway. The mansion felt different at night. Shadows stretched in unnatural ways, and the paintings lining the walls seemed to watch him. He passed room after room, each one locked. But then, one wasn't. A single door at the end of the hall, slightly ajar, a faint light flickering inside. Jason's pulse quickened. He pushed it open. Inside was a study, elegant, massive, lined with bookshelves filled with ancient-looking books and expensive artifacts. And at the center of the room was a desk covered in documents. His eyes landed on a folder with his name on it. His stomach tightened. He reached for it, fingers shaking. The moment he flipped it open, his blood ran cold. She knew everything about him, his past, his debts, the fights he had been in as a teenager, things he had never told anyone, page after page detailing his entire life. But then something even worse, a medical report. Jason froze. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as he scanned the paper. His blood type, his genetic markers, his compatibility for something. He flipped to the next page, and that's when he saw it. A list of names. All men. All much younger than Vivian. All labeled deceased. Jason's hands shook. Suddenly, a voice behind him. "You weren't supposed to see that." Jason spun around. Vivian stood in the doorway watching him. But she wasn't angry. She was calm. Too calm, like she had been expecting this. Jason's stomach twisted. What the hell have I just walked into? Jason's pulse thundered in his ears as he backed away from the desk, his breath shallow. The papers in front of him were not just documents. They were warnings. A trail of men before him, all young, all married to Vivian, all dead. Vivian stepped into the room, her silk robe flowing behind her like liquid shadow. Her expression remained unreadable, but her eyes, sharp, calculating, held no surprise. "You weren't supposed to see that," she repeated, her voice smooth. Jason's throat tightened. "Then maybe you shouldn't have left my entire death certificate lying around." Her lips curled slightly. "Don't be dramatic. You're not dead. Yet." His stomach nodded. Yet. He grabbed the folder, flipping through the names again. Who were they? Vivian sighed as if he were an impatient child. "My previous husbands." Jason clenched his jaw. "And what happened to them?" She took a step closer, slow, deliberate. "What do you think?" Jason felt the room closing in. "They died," he whispered. "All of them." Vivian tilted her head. "Not right away." His stomach twisted. He took a step back, but she moved faster, closing the distance, her cool fingers pressing against his wrist. Jason flinched. "You don't have to be afraid, Jason," she said softly. "Not if you do exactly as I say." His jaw locked. "And if I don't?" For the first time, her smile faltered. Then, almost too fast to catch, a flicker of something in her expression, a flash of pain, of regret. It disappeared just as quickly. She leaned in, her breath warm against his skin. "I chose you for a reason." Jason's pulse pounded. He couldn't tell if it was from fear or something else. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just a marriage. This was a trap, and he had just run straight into it. Jason's body tensed as Vivian's fingers lingered against his wrist. Cold, possessive, calculated. Every instinct in him screamed run, but his legs felt like lead, his mind spinning with the weight of what he had just uncovered. He needed to think, fast. "You chose me for a reason?" His voice was hoarse. "Then tell me, Vivian, what am I here for?" She exhaled, her steel gray eyes scanning him like he was an equation she had already solved. "Because you're the first one who fits." Jason's stomach twisted. "Fits for what?" Her lips parted slightly, but for the first time since he had met her, she hesitated. Jason didn't wait. With a sudden jolt, he yanked his arm away and bolted. Vivian's calm demeanor shattered. "Jason!" But he was already sprinting down the long corridor, his bare feet slamming against the cold marble. The house felt endless, hallway after hallway stretching into the darkness, every door locked, every turn leading him deeper into a place that no longer felt real. A sudden clang echoed behind him. Vivian hadn't followed, but something else had. Jason skidded to a stop as two figures emerged from the shadows. The butlers, expressionless, still, wrong. Jason's breath hitched. He recognized them now. Their faces. They were in the files. Vivian's past husbands. Something inhuman lingered in their glassy eyes. Not dead, but not alive either. A slow, eerie smile curled at the edge of their lips. Jason staggered back. "No," he whispered. "This is impossible." One of them, a man who looked barely 30, dressed in a pristine suit, tilted his head, and then he spoke. "Not yet." Jason felt the floor tilt beneath him. A sudden dizziness rushed through his skull. His veins burned. His pulse slowed. He stumbled, clutching his chest. Vivian's voice echoed down the hall, calm again. "You should have listened, Jason." His fingers dug into his own skin, but he couldn't fight it. Something was happening to him. Something he didn't understand. The walls blurred. His body weighed down like stone. And before the darkness swallowed him, he saw Vivian's silhouette standing at the end of the corridor, watching, waiting. "You were always going to be mine." Then, everything went black. Jason's body felt like it was sinking. Darkness wrapped around him, pressing into his chest, his limbs heavy, unmovable. He wasn't unconscious, not completely. He could hear, he could feel, but he couldn't move. Distant footsteps echoed, growing closer. Then Vivian's voice. "Good, it's starting." A cold hand touched his forehead. He flinched internally, but his body didn't react. He was trapped inside himself. "You're fighting it," Vivian murmured. "That's expected. But Jason, my dear, you don't understand." She leaned in, her breath warm against his skin. "This isn't a death sentence. It's an evolution." His chest tightened. Her voice softened, almost affectionate. "Do you know why I chose you?" Jason's fingers twitched, a flicker of movement. He focused, fought, but she kept talking, drowning him in her words. "All the others, they weren't compatible. Their bodies rejected the gift. But you," she smiled, "you're the first one who will survive." A jolt of fear shot through him. Gift? Survive? His pulse pounded in his ears. He forced his fingers to curl, his breath to deepen. His body was waking up. Vivian didn't notice. "You see, Jason, my family's wealth isn't built on business. It's built on something older, something ancient, a bloodline that was never meant to end." Jason's breath hitched. His mind flashed to the medical report, the one that listed his genetic markers, his blood type, his compatibility. She hadn't chosen him for love, not even for control. She had chosen him because he was a match. A match for what? "You should be grateful," Vivian whispered. "You'll be the first one to take my place, to continue what I built." Jason's heart slammed against his ribs. She wasn't planning to kill him. She was planning to turn him into her. Adrenaline rushed through his veins. He gasped, his body jerking upright. Vivian stumbled back, startled. Jason's head throbbed, but he forced himself to stand. His vision swam, but the fear kept him moving. Vivian's eyes narrowed. The calm was gone. "You're stronger than I thought," she mused. "Good. That will make the transition easier." Jason shook his head. "You're insane." Vivian sighed like she had heard it all before. "You're thinking too small, Jason." He staggered toward the desk, toward the documents, the evidence. Vivian moved too fast. 1 second she was across the room, the next she was in front of him, blocking his path. Jason swung at her. Vivian caught his wrist. Her grip was impossibly strong. "You don't get to leave," she murmured. Jason's vision darkened at the edges. The ring on his finger, the one she had placed there at their wedding, began to burn. He clenched his teeth, and then he did the only thing he could. With a raw, desperate force, he ripped the ring from his finger. A piercing scream filled the air. Not from him, from her. Vivian staggered back, clutching her chest. The air shifted. Like something was breaking. The walls groaned. The mansion trembled. Jason didn't wait. He turned and ran. The doors that had been locked before, now flung open. He sprinted down the grand staircase, past the frozen staff, past the portraits of the men who came before him. Outside, the storm had cleared. The sky was open. The gate was unlocked. Jason didn't look back. He ran until his lungs burned, until the mansion was nothing but a shadow in the distance. Only then did he stop. Only then did he dare to breathe. Epilogue. Months passed. Jason disappeared from public records, and he changed his name. Moved to a city where no one had heard of Vivian Blackwood, but he never stopped looking over his shoulder. One night, a package arrived. No return address. Inside, a single gold ring and a note. "You think you escaped? You don't leave something like this behind." Jason's breath hitched. The ring pulsed, just once, before going still. And deep down, he knew it wasn't over.